Section 8 of Reclaiming Revolution. History, Summation, and Lessons from the Work of STORM. Standing Together to Organize a Revolutionary Movement. This recording is in the public domain. Recorded by the Progressing America Project. Reclaiming Revolution, Section 8. 1999 to 2000. Clouds start to form. In the midst of STORM's rapid expansion and many accomplishments, there were also warning signs of trouble that would erupt in the following year. The Corps distributed an internal memo noting 4 challenges facing the group as our membership and work expanded. 1. The resignation of a Corps member over political differences with the growing Maoist orientation within STORM. Since this member was also STORM's most developed theoretician, this resignation reduced the organization's ability to understand and develop revolutionary political theory. 2. Tensions stemming from dating relationships within the membership. Such tensions were creating significant stresses on personal unity within the group. 3. Confusion and mistrust that had developed within both POCTF and Olin. Our relationships were becoming strained with 2 of our closest ally organizations. 4. Exhaustion and poor health among STORM's most active members. Physical and emotional fatigue were both widespread, particularly within the Corps. The memo encouraged members to be more generous with comrades both within the group and outside the group. Members should communicate better and more often with one another. And members should listen for the valuable lessons in other activists' criticisms of the group. Nevertheless, a level of defensiveness and impatience with people who criticized STORM remained. Ultimately, this defensiveness clouded our ability to take stock of the very real problems developing in our work. These problems would come more strongly to the forefront in the next year. Continued growth, STORM's final class. We brought in our last class during this period. Most of these new members had been active in the youth and student movement to defeat Proposition 21. They had helped to build several of the organizations that led that fight, including See Beyond, the Youth Force Coalition, and Third Eye Movement. One member of this class was also deeply involved in organizing the direct action protests against the World Trade Organization in Seattle. Deepening and expanding our local work. STORM continued to be engaged in a high level of mass work through the work sectors. Work began to sketch out plans for a Bay Area-wide worker center. The idea was to create an explicitly political worker organizing collective that would include workers from various sectors of the workforce. The Worker Center would build mass organizations of low and no-wage workers. It would also develop individual workers as revolutionary leaders. Culture and propaganda continued to provide a public face for STORM, with written and visual agitation and propaganda. The work group produced pieces promoting STORM's line on, among other questions, revolutionary feminism and the role of the bourgeoisie state. The latter designed specifically for the protests at the Democratic National Convention in Los Angeles. Culture and propaganda also deepened its study, participating in joint reading and discussion sessions with Underground Railroad on the role of culture in revolutionary movements. Finally, culture and propaganda initiated, quote, Chant Down Babylon, end quote, an ongoing STORM-sponsored poetry event that provided a space for radical and revolutionary poets to share their work. In our on-the-ground work, STORM continued to work primarily with young people and students. This work, in the context of the fight against Proposition 21, had really taken off. RIME members were deeply immersed throughout the Bay Area youth movement, playing leading roles in the Youth Force Coalition, Third Eye Movement 415, and Third Eye Movement 510, See footnote. Pencil, Progressive Educators Network creating International Liberation, a radical teachers collective, and Soul. Begin footnote. The People of Color Task Force to Free Mumia had joined San Francisco-based youth organization Third Eye Movement and become its Oakland chapter, Third Eye Movement 510. End footnote. The fight against Prop 21 reached its height in the weeks leading up to the March 2000 election. Demonstrations drew several thousand young people. Militant direct action and civil disobedience were becoming familiar, even commonplace, to young people of color activists. A week and a half before the election, young people occupied a local high school overnight. The day after Prop 21 passed, more than 100 young people were arrested as they occupied the plush lobby of the San Francisco Hilton, which supported Proposition 21 financially. In addition to our work sector work, Storm also convened a, quote, Sisters at the Center, end quote, brunch in celebration of International Women's Day in 2000. The brunch created a space for women of color to discuss the issues they face in the movement, like sexist dynamics in the movement, and the need for child care to create spaces for mothers' participation. It brought together women working in various sectors of the movement, welfare rights, youth work, the prison industrial complex, housing rights, and cultural work. The participants appreciated the space to talk explicitly about the issues they faced in their work. Storm becomes a player in the national left. Around this time, Storm began to play a significant role in the national left. Coming out of the protests against the WTO in Seattle in 1999, we had a stronger sense than ever that we were part of a growing national trend. Several Storm members had participated in those protests and had met there with the Brown Collective in Seattle and other revolutionaries from across the country. When they got home, Storm started to plan a national gathering to bring these young people of color activists together. We thought that this emerging national trend could become a more coherent national political force, an expression of the hope and momentum of the moment. Hoping to continue to build a relationship with these forces, several members went to the Washington, D.C. protests against the World Bank and International Monetary Fund in April. In August, we sent an organizational contingent to the protests at the Democratic National Convention in Los Angeles. Our experiences in Seattle, Washington, D.C., and Los Angeles helped us to build personal, political, and organizational unity with many young people of color leftists across the country. They also gave us an unprecedented opportunity to be in the streets with thousands of protesters from many different organizations and political affiliations. We came away from these demonstrations with a new sense of the power and potential of massive popular protest. Continuing political education. By now, almost all of Storm's members, Corps in general, were committed to Marxist politics. This was a significant development. Just a year earlier, the Corps alone was explicitly committed to Marxism. Members increasingly wanted to engage more deeply and critically with the Marxist tradition. The group continued to engage in study of the basics of Marxism, including dialectical materialism and a group reading of Mao's On Practice and On Contradiction. We also pushed at or went beyond the limits of traditional Marxist canon, studying such topics as revolutionary feminism, the Palestinian liberation struggle, transgender liberation, methods of evaluation, self-care for cadre, and revolutionary mass organizing. Running up against our limits, Storm's lack of strategy becomes a major problem. We were working hard and making important contributions. But we were also making mistakes. Too often, we met constructive criticism with defensiveness. When working in mass organizations, Storm members would sometimes be commandist, trying to lead other activists in directions that they did not want, or were not politically prepared to go. Other times, members would be tailist, failing to challenge a mass organization if it moved in a backwards direction. Our members often used, or misused, revolutionary jargon that had been introduced in training sessions, but that they didn't really understand. Such jargon served only to alienate members from other activists, without pushing the discussion forward. As we examined these and other errors, we saw many causes for them. We saw two factors as especially crucial. First, we were exhausted, and it was beginning to show. Members were stretched too thin, and were not performing as well, or as skillfully, as we might have otherwise. Second, the expansion and deepening of our work made it increasingly obvious that we lacked a strategy sufficient to guide our work as revolutionaries. We had come up against the limits of our, quote, moving from resistance to revolution, end quote, framework. We needed a more thorough revolutionary strategy. End of section 8.